I stayed up until 10 p.m. watching some YouTube videos on my laptop. To the right of the screen, a queue of clips waited to play. I was watching a highlight of one of my favorite basketball players, Larry Big Al Johnson. The clip showed him making a long-range shot at the buzzer, a perfect, clean throw. His long blonde hair was tied back into a ponytail, giving him the look of a movie star. I've known Big Al since college. He was a legendary player on our team and lived in the same apartment building as me. We crossed paths often, especially during the off-season. When he turned pro, he was drafted by the Wizards, the team closest to my home in Virginia. 3 years ago, he retired from the NBA and now works as a game presenter for Wiz TV. I often watched his videos, indulging in some nostalgia. The next video in the queue, however, had nothing to do with basketball. It was a news clip. In it, Big Al was dancing with a stunning blonde at a Miami nightclub. The dance was overtly sexual, and the blonde in question was my wife. The clip had been filmed that evening and had just been posted online. The headline read, "Big Al, Another Conquest." I watched the entire clip, which lasted about 3 minutes. It ended with Big Al and Lee, my wife, locked in a passionate, full-body kiss. My stomach churned. I downloaded the clip, picked up my phone, and called Lee's cell. She didn't answer. I checked the timestamp on the video. It was filmed about an hour earlier and had just been uploaded. Lee was supposed to be at a business meeting in Miami, attending a 4-day conference with her advertising firm. One of the attendees was my good friend, Bart Kovat. Hoping for some clarity, I called him. "Hello," Bart answered. "Bart, it's Lee Martin," I said. "Everyone calls me Marty." There was a pause on the line before Bart responded. "Marty, how are you?" "Not great, Bart. Do you even know where Lee is right now?" There was a longer pause. "Man, this is bad. So, she's with Big Al?" Bart exhaled heavily. "Marty, I don't know all the details, but I can tell you this. She's taken over YouTube right now. By morning, my kids will see this, and so will everyone else. I need to know, has she been sleeping with him? Is this something that's been going on for a while?" Bart sighed again. "Look, they've been spending time together. We all noticed it. They were inseparable after Tuesday night. When we checked into the hotel, they got to know each other pretty quickly. Probably from college. Lee shows up to the meetings during the day, but she hasn't eaten with the group even once. Her roommate says she hasn't been in the room at night. We're all assuming she's been with him." My grip tightened on the phone. "Thanks, Bart. Can you do me one favor? If you see her tomorrow morning before her flight, tell her not to bother coming home. I'll handle it from there." "I understand." "I'm sorry, Marty." "Me too," I said and hung up. Lee and I met in college back when we were in our early 20s. It was our penultimate year, and we were both taking math classes. On the first day of class, I walked in, looked around, and saw the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She was sitting alone, doodling in her notebook. There were only 5 other students in the room, all guys, but she sat by herself. I immediately took the desk next to her. She glanced at me and smiled. "Well, someone was smart enough to take this seat," she said. Her tone was playful, but I could tell she was sizing me up. I grinned. "I was just wondering if you smelled funny or something." She laughed, then glanced at the other guys. They were all nerdy and shy classic math majors. I wasn't exactly a nerd. Sure, I was in a math class, but I was athletic and looked decent enough. I'm 5 feet 8 inches, weigh 150 pounds, with brown hair and eyes. Women generally didn't mind me, and some even said I had character. "You don't smell funny," I replied, leaning closer for dramatic effect. "But I might need to get a little closer to be sure." She smirked. "They're all shy nerds. You're not one of them, are you?" "Nope. I'm Marty." I extended my hand. And you are? Lior? She replied, shaking my hand. But everyone calls me Lee. Well, Lee, I said. When we get married, you won't even have to change the monogram on your luggage. How convenient is that? She laughed, and just then, the teacher walked in. After class, Lee and I walked together to the student union building. She had striking green eyes, blonde hair, and a 6-foot-tall, slender figure. Her face had the natural beauty of the girl next door. When she smiled at me, I was completely captivated. I said, I bet you were surprised when none of the guys sat next to you. Every guy in that room would have wanted to. Thanks, she replied. I was surprised. Usually I have to fight guys off. You must have taken advantage of my moment of insecurity. I laughed. Maybe, but now you're stuck with me. I suppose I am, she said, checking her watch. I have another class in 20 minutes, but if you're free tonight, maybe we can grab dinner. Since we're in the same class, we should probably get to know each other better. I had to try. Well, I hope to see you again. Me too. I like you. At least we'll see each other in class, Lee said. We saw each other in class twice a week. The subject was challenging, and I had to work hard to keep up. One day, I asked her a question about a problem, and she patiently explained everything to me. After class, I asked if she was struggling with any of the coursework. No, I'm good at mathematics. What about you? I need this for my chemistry major, but I spend way too much time on it. Maybe you could give me some advice. She raised an eyebrow. Is this a joke? I told you I have a boyfriend. No joke, I said quickly. I respect that. I just need help. We could meet at a diner and go over the material, strictly as tutor and student. She hesitated but finally agreed. Fine. Diner at 4. Deal, I said. At our diner meetings, I got to know Lee much better. We hit it off quickly, and our conversations began to include much more than just mathematics. One day, as we were working through problems, a large man approached our table, where our books were laid out. Lee glanced up at him and smiled her dazzling smile. Marty, this is my boyfriend, Rashad, she said. Rashad, this is Marty from my math class. I stood and shook his hand. Rashad was a medium-built black man, about 5 feet 8 inches, weighing around 220 pounds. He sat next to Lee and we closed our math books. Rashad asked why I was taking this class with Lee and all the nerds. I need an upper-level math course for my chemistry major. It also helps with programming, I explained. The three of us started discussing why some majors required courses that didn't seem to fit. It was an engaging conversation, and I realized Rashad was a smart guy. What's your specialization? I asked him. Physical training, he said. I play hockey but plan to teach high school if I don't make money from hockey. Maybe become a PE teacher. That's a solid plan, I said. Probably better than mine. Chemists get hired, but programmers seem to have better opportunities. What about you, Lee? Rashad asked. I want to go into business. I like the idea of making money, she replied with a grin. As the semester progressed, I saw more and more of Lee. One day, I invited her and Rashad to dinner at my off-campus apartment. I also invited my neighbor, Stephanie, a stunning high school graduate. Stephanie and I had a friends with benefits relationship. Dinner went well. I cooked fish stew, spinach salad, cookies, and ice cream. The women drank wine while Rashad and I stuck to beer. Lee and Rashad left around midnight after we all played a few games of bridge. Surprisingly, all 4 of us enjoyed the game, even though none of us had ever partnered up before. Rashad and Stephanie formed one team, while Lee and I formed another. Lee was into some strange bidding systems, but I gradually adapted to her style. In the end, we won. Stephanie stayed the night. She was attractive and passionate, but we both knew our relationship was purely casual. She had a boyfriend back in her hometown, and I never asked what he thought of us. That dinner ended up being somewhat fateful. Lee later asked me to join her in a backup bridge tournament at the nearby army base. I agreed. Meanwhile, Stephanie somehow got Rashad's phone number. Probably at the dinner, though I hadn't noticed. 2 days later, I spotted them together. They were walking across campus toward our building. Curious, I followed them from a distance. They entered the building and got on the elevator. Stephanie lived on the 4th floor, and the elevator stopped there. I wasn't sure what to do. The bridge tournament was only 2 days away, and I didn't want to cause unnecessary drama. I returned to my room and tried to relax. From my window, I could see the building's entrance. 2 hours later, Rashad walked out the front door. I quickly made my way to Stephanie's door and knocked. She shouted something from inside but didn't open immediately. When she did, she looked flushed, wearing flip-flops and a tight dress with no bra. "Hi, Steph. Not a good time?" I asked. "Nope. Not now, Marty," she said bluntly. "Well, damn," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Marty, you saw, didn't you? That's why you're here." "Yeah, I saw," I admitted. Stephanie smirked. "Well, did you have fun spying?" "Look, I don't feel awkward about it. I feel great." "Don't worry about me," I said. "I'm just trying to figure out what to do about this whole situation. Do you think Lee should know what Rashad's been up to?" Stephanie shrugged. "If I were in her position, I'd want to know." "Same here," I said. 2 days later, Lee and I competed in the bridge tournament at the army base. It was a lot of fun. The army team was excellent, but we managed to place 3rd out of 20. "Not bad," Lee said afterward. "We even got points, whatever that means." As we walked to my car, she suddenly asked, "Why didn't you tell me about Rashad and Steph?" I froze. "What? How did you know?" "Steph told Rashad you saw them, and Rashad told me everything." "Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't think it was my place," I admitted. "But yeah, I saw them together." "Okay," Lee said softly. "Marty, I want you to take me to your place. If you want to, of course." "Oh, I want to," I said, trying to suppress my excitement. I drove, perhaps not as carefully as usual, toward my building. I parked, and we quickly made our way to my apartment. Once the door closed behind us, Lee kissed me passionately. A slow, heated kiss. She pressed her body against mine, moving rhythmically, and I couldn't help but respond. I pressed my aroused self against her abdomen. She pulled back, took my hand, and led me to the bedroom. I quickly removed my shirt, trousers, and underwear. Lee was already undressed, wearing nothing but panties. I knelt down and gently slid them off. Intimacy with Lee was extraordinary. I brought her to climax twice, and the 3rd time we both reached satisfaction simultaneously. "Oh, Marty, oh my," she gasped, breathless. And I believed her that I'd always felt that we were physically compatible. For context, my size in that department is average, maybe slightly above for my stature, but I focused entirely on satisfying her, and that night it seemed to work well. Afterward, we took a short break, and Lee began to stimulate me again. It felt incredible, and I reciprocated, which led her to a powerful climax. Moments later, I followed suit. We spent the next 20 minutes lying together, tenderly caressing each other. When I got up to use the restroom, Lee joined me in the shower. "Shower?" she asked in a seductive tone, raising an eyebrow. We indulged in a long, intimate shower, pressing against the sleek tiles. Afterward, we cleaned up and returned to bed, falling asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, I woke up and brushed my teeth. Lee joined me in the bathroom just as I was finishing. I handed her a spare toothbrush, and once I got rid of my morning breath, she took care of my morning excitement. At breakfast, Lee asked with a teasing smile, "Am I as good as Stephanie? Or maybe as good as Rashad?" I stared at her for a moment, unsure of what to say. Then she grinned. "He's bigger," she admitted. "But you're better. Stephanie is very good. But you're fantastic." From that day forward, Lee and I were inseparable. She practically moved in with me. Rashad wasn't thrilled about it, but there wasn't much he could do. Before long, he had another main girl and continued visiting Stephanie regularly during his senior year. Big L moved into our building during Rashad's final year, taking an apartment on the 4th floor. I occasionally saw him with Stephanie. While they didn't live together, they were often seen coming and going. We exchanged polite hi and bye until one day Stephanie invited Lee and me over for dessert. Big Al was there too. It was a pleasant evening overall. I found Big Al to be polite, smart, and perhaps a little too attentive to Lee. Maybe Stephanie felt the same way because we were never invited back after that night. Lee and I got married at 22 right out of college. I got a job with the government as a programmer at the Pentagon, while Lee joined a public relations firm. Her primary role was advertising for companies, which often meant influencing government officials, senators, congressmen, and agency representatives. I inherited a house from my grandfather, not far from work. The tenants had just moved out, so we decided to move in. It was a 3-bedroom house with a large kitchen, a garage that had been converted into living space, and a finished basement that needed some renovation. I took care of the basement with help from a high school friend who owned a construction business in Virginia. At 24, Lee became pregnant, and we had twin daughters, Betsy and Linda. They weren't identical but were equally a handful. Lee took a year off work, and I scaled back my hours to focus on helping with the twins. By the end of that year, I switched to contractor status, which allowed me to work from home. When the girls turned 4, Lee returned to work full-time, while I continued working from home. My contracting work was going well, and I even made more money, though I no longer had benefits. Meanwhile, Lee's work grew more intense, mostly because she allowed it to. She was ambitious and driven, achieving significant success in her career. I had also been working on 2 ideas for new systems that I thought could be profitable. These projects took up some of my spare time, but they were exciting. We made good money overall and lived comfortably. When the girls turned 13 and entered middle school, I was 35 and in great shape. I stayed active by running and playing table tennis. For the most part, life seemed good. If you had asked me before seeing the video of Lee with Big Al, I would have said our sex life was enjoyable, at least for me. But after 15 years together, I realized things might have felt stale to her, even if I hadn't noticed it myself. The morning after I saw the YouTube video of her and Big L dancing in Miami, I started wondering whether this was a one-time thing or something that had been going on for a while. I had so many questions. I decided to take precautionary steps to protect my daughters. I asked them to do a DNA swab, and I did one myself. This was the day after I informed them about the video. I felt it was necessary to prepare them for any potential fallout, especially at school. It was Friday, and they had tests and group projects to complete at school. While they went about their day, I tried to piece together everything I knew. Classes began at 10 a.m. when Lee called. I saw her name on the screen and let it go to voicemail. "Marty, pick up the phone. Marty, please. Marty, I love you. I made a mistake. I'll be back this afternoon. She broke off sobbing. One of the improvements I'd made to the house was an electronic entry system, and I'd already changed the code. The converted garage, which had been sitting idle but was fully furnished, became Lee's temporary storage. I carried her clothes and other essentials there, neatly packing everything away. My mother called, as did Lee's mother. Both wanted to know what I planned to do. I didn't know, and I told them so. I opened Lee's Gmail account and scrolled through the last month's emails, both old and new. I also checked the trash folder. There was no sign of contact with Big Al. The emails mostly pertained to work and the conference, and there were 1 or 2 casual messages from a colleague who had also gone to Miami. Lee's plane was scheduled to land at noon. I ignored her calls and asked a friend to go to the airport to observe the situation and keep an eye on who she left with. My friend discreetly filmed everything. He saw Lee exit the terminal with her work group. She looked around as if searching for someone, then went to collect her luggage. My friend stayed near the exit for 5 more minutes after most of the passengers had disembarked. Then Big Al came out. He too looked around and headed to baggage claim. Lee grabbed her suitcase and scanned the area again. When she spotted Big Al, she turned and walked away. Big Al collected his bag and exited the terminal. Lee was waiting for a taxi outside when Big Al approached her and spoke. She shook her head and refused whatever he said. A taxi pulled up, and the dispatcher directed both of them into the same cab. My friend recorded everything. About 20 minutes later, the taxi arrived at my house, but only Lee got out. She rushed up to the door, but when she tried her code, it didn't work. Frustrated, she knocked and rang the bell repeatedly. I opened the door. Lee burst into tears. "I'm so sorry, Marty. I never could have imagined what a mess this would become. I love you. I have nothing with him. Please believe me." "You don't live here anymore, Lee," I said coldly. "Your things are in the garage. You can stay there until you find another place, or maybe Stephanie's house is available." "Marty, I have nothing with him. I love you," she pleaded. "You openly humiliated me, Lee. You made me a laughingstock to the girls at school, to everyone. God knows what they're going through because of this. You're evil. Get out of my sight." Her face fell as if I'd struck her. She staggered backward, then sat down on the lawn and cried. Our neighbor, Mrs. Cunningham, came outside. She walked over to Lee, crouched next to her, and they talked. Eventually, Lee went to Mrs. Cunningham's house. I called Lee's mother and informed her that Lee was in the neighborhood and could use some support. Ellen, her mother, didn't seem overly concerned, but she promised to come by in about an hour. I sat down in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, trying to imagine what would happen next. Nothing seemed clear or right to me. The night before, I had called a trusted attorney and been referred to family law attorney Joan Ellis. I made an appointment for the following Monday, but Joan called me back that morning. "Mr. Martin, this is Joan Ellis. I saw that you made an appointment for Monday, but I wanted to call you now. This is about your wife and the basketball player, correct?" "Yes," I said. "How did you find out?" "The video doesn't name her. The TV reporters put it together. Big Al is a big name here, especially in gossip columns." "Of course," I muttered. "I thought there was no point in waiting until Monday. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning at 10? "Yes, I'll be there," I said. "Great. In the meantime, please prepare a brief history of your relationship with your wife, including anything relevant about Mr. Johnson, if you know him. I'll also need your financial statements if you have them. And, Mr. Martin, I strongly advise against any rash actions in the meantime." "Understood," I said, and we ended the call. Moments later, my phone rang again. Without thinking, I answered. It was Big Al. "Marty," he began. I wanted to apologize. You," I interrupted, my voice flat and lifeless. "I will ruin your life, Al. I will bend over backwards to destroy everything you've built." You've made me a laughingstock to my family and my kids. If you ever see me coming, you'd better run." There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, he said, "It wasn't just me. She was my wife. We have 2 kids. I was happily married to her until she went to Miami. Don't you dare justify this to me." He hesitated again and then hung up. I realized I now had his number. I logged into our shared phone account to check Lee's call logs. I saw that she'd called Big Al twice after arriving in Miami. However, there were no calls before that, nor any messages I could see. Based on this, I assumed their meeting in Miami had been accidental and not pre-planned. Out of curiosity, I checked the schedule for Big Al's work. There had been a basketball game in Miami on Wednesday afternoon, and Big Al was the MC for the event. So he had been in Miami on business. The doorbell rang. When I checked, I saw my parents along with my father and mother-in-law. Lee was gone and I let them in. I offered drinks, but they all refused and sat down in the living room. I stood near the doorway and asked, "Well, my mother," Lacey responded. "We've had a small meeting." We gathered in the living room, and my mother, Lacey, finally spoke. "We decided to come here to find out what you think." I sat down, my emotions overwhelming me. Quietly but noticeably, I sobbed for a moment, then straightened up and looked at my mother. She later told me that in that single look, she saw so much devastation and melancholy, so much pain, that she realized nothing could be fixed. My dad broke the silence. "Is there any chance you could talk to Lee?" "For what?" I snapped. What could she possibly say? She destroyed our family. And it wasn't just one night, it was 3. She didn't even try to hide it from her colleagues. Now the whole world knows. Ellen, my mother-in-law, intervened. "I know she made a mistake, Marty. A big mistake. She knows it too. But you have girls, and you've loved each other for many years. There's still a lot worth saving, if you can find it in yourself." I shook my head. "I don't consider her my wife anymore. I will never think of her as my wife again. She's just the mother of my children now, and that's all." Ellen's voice grew sharper. "You're in pain, Marty. I get that. Your ego took a big hit and you're struggling to get past it. But your marriage doesn't have to end because of just a few days." "Ellen," I said firmly, "I admire and love you, but your daughter has done irreparable damage. Please don't make any more attempts at reconciliation. There's no chance." She sighed and raised her hands in defeat, while I continued, "What we should be thinking about now is how life will look after the divorce, when it's finalized." My mother burst into tears. "Just wait a few days, Marty," she pleaded. "Just a few. Your dad and I can take the kids for the weekend. We'll take them to the lake." I reluctantly agreed. Just then, the girls were dropped off by the school bus. They ran up to the door, but the code had been changed, so they had to knock. When they saw their grandparents, they were surprised but immediately started telling me about their day. It wasn't as bad as I feared. Betsy, my tougher daughter, mentioned that Sharon Davis, one of her friends, had asked her about the video. Betsy told Sharon she hadn't seen it but knew about it. Sharon then asked if her parents were getting a divorce. Betsy didn't know. Linda didn't know. I knew. I told them, "We'll figure this out later." They weren't overly emotional, but Linda asked where her mother was. Ellen stepped in, answering, "She's next door. Your grandparents are here to talk to your dad. But we think you girls should pack your things for the weekend. We'll take you to the lake." The girls hesitated but eventually agreed to pack. I didn't want them going to Lee, but the others insisted it was necessary. I made it clear. Lee could only see the girls on the porch. Once their bags were packed, Ellen went to get Lee. The suitcases were loaded into the car, and the girls waited on the porch with their grandparents. Lee and Ellen returned shortly after. The girls didn't run to their mother. Instead, they just stood there, waiting. From my bedroom window on the second floor, I could see and hear everything. Lee knelt down in front of the girls, and all three hugged her. "Mom," Linda asked softly, "what have you done? How could you have sex with that guy?" The last question came out as a sob. Lee's voice trembled. "I made a very bad mistake, sweetheart. I'm trying to understand why I did it. But I still love you girls. And your dad. Very much." Betsy crossed her arms, her face stony. "If you loved Dad, you wouldn't have done this. And you put it all on video? How could you?" Tears streamed down her face. Lee began to cry, too. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "It was a terrible mistake." She tried to hug Betsy, but Betsy pushed her away. Defeated, Lee stood up and ran back to her father's car. My parents put the girls into their van, and everyone drove off in different directions. I sat on my bed, stunned and deeply saddened. Then, the anger hit me. I felt it boiling inside, directed mainly at Larry. I thrashed around my room, yelling and screaming, until I stormed down to the basement. I began punching the heavy bag hanging there, pouring all my fury into each strike. Every blow was aimed at Larry or at Lee. When I finally stopped, exhausted and drenched in sweat, my hands were red and bleeding. I cleaned them up as best I could, poured myself a stiff drink, and went to bed. It took a long time, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, I went for a long, fast run to clear my head. When I returned, I gathered all my financial documents and went to meet with Joan Ellis, the family lawyer. Joan turned out to be in her 40s, slender with dark hair and eyes. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweatshirt. "Sorry, I'm a little underdressed," she said with an apologetic smile. "It's Saturday, and I've been working in the yard." "No problem," I replied. "You look great." She smiled and motioned for me to follow. "Let's head to the conference room." Once we were seated, I began. "Miss Ellis, I'd like to understand my options for divorcing my wife." "I can walk you through everything," she said. "But are you absolutely sure you want a divorce? This is a hard road to take, especially with 2 children." "Yes," I said firmly. "The twins are 13 years old, and I want custody of them." Joan nodded. "We'll get to that. But first, let's go back to the question of whether you want to end your marriage. Has anything like what happened in Miami ever happened before? Has anything like what happened in Miami ever happened before? Or is this an isolated incident?" Joan asked. "I don't think she's ever done anything like this before," I replied hesitantly. "But I don't know for sure. So, if it's true, you're certain you can't come to terms with it?" "No," I said quickly, leaving no room for doubt. "Fine," she said, moving on. "Then let's discuss finances." We went over who earned how much and who did what for the children. Joan was pleased to learn that the house belonged to me before the marriage and had been solely in my name. She also noted that the children had lived there their entire lives, which she said could work in my favor when it came to custody. Additionally, she emphasized that my work schedule as a contractor working from home and my role as a primary caregiver gave me an advantage. However, she warned that nothing could be guaranteed in court. We earned similar incomes, though mine was less stable. Joan believed that neither of us would be required to pay child support, given the circumstances, though she noted that the non-custodial parent would likely be ordered to contribute something. "How quickly can we start the divorce proceedings?" I asked. "It'll take about a week to prepare and file the documents," she replied. "But I think you should wait a little longer. People often change their minds, and it's very likely the court will order you to attend counseling." "Can this be avoided?" I don't want to ever speak with her one-on-one. You'll have to have those conversations, Joan explained, though we can try to minimize them. She glanced at my hands, which were wrapped in bandages. What happened to your hands? I was angry last night, I admitted. I took it out on my heavy bag, forgot to put gloves on. Well, at least you didn't take it out on Mr. Johnson or your wife, she said, half joking. I frowned. Speaking of which, is there a way to sue him for this? He has to pay. Joan shook her head. In this state, there's no legal pathway to sue for adultery or alienation of affection. That used to be an option, but not anymore. I also checked Florida law. There's no such possibility there either. He must pay, I said, my voice hardening. My tone seemed to unsettle Joan slightly. Let me see what I can do, she said cautiously. Just no violence, please. No promises, I muttered. Mr. Martin, she said firmly, I have to warn you that, as your lawyer, everything you say to me is confidential. However, if I believe you are about to commit a violent crime, I may have to report it. Joan, you'll never have to worry about that, I replied, trying to reassure her. I signed the agreement, paid her fee, and asked her to have the documents ready as soon as possible. When I got home, it was already noon. My father, Leland, called shortly after I walked in. Hello, how are you doing today? He asked. I'm fine. I just came back from the lawyer's office. Oh? And what did they say? We talked about what would happen in the event of a divorce. Marty, he said gently, you need to hold off on this. Don't rush the decision. It's too important. You shouldn't make it in haste. As soon as Lee let that bastard touch her, she was history. The fact that she did it over and over again just makes it worse. But even once would have been enough. Your mother thinks Lee hurt you so deeply that there's no hope, my dad said. And I think she may be right. But still, I want you to slow down. At least let Lee explain everything. What could she possibly say that would change my mind? I snapped. There was silence on the line for a moment. Then my dad admitted, I don't know. I can't think of anything. Exactly, I said firmly. There's nothing she could say. We shifted the conversation to the girls and how they were handling everything. Linda was sad and withdrawn, while Betsy was angry and struggling to control her emotions. My mom was working with both of them, reassuring them that they weren't losing their parents, that we would always be there for them. Later, the home phone rang. Without caller ID, I let it go to voicemail. It was Lee. Marty, if you're there, please pick up the phone. I need to talk to you. Marty, please, I need this. I know I screwed up, and I know how angry and hurt you must be. You're the only person I've ever been able to talk to about anything serious. Will I lose you? No, please. Her voice broke as she sobbed. Then she hung up. As I listened, I couldn't stop myself from crying. The anger surged again, and I headed downstairs to the basement. This time, I remembered to put on gloves before hitting the heavy bag. But it still hurt. I punched and kicked the bag until I was utterly exhausted, then went upstairs to take a shower. Some men turn to alcohol in situations like this. For me, it's the heavy bag, or running. As I showered, my thoughts drifted back to Larry. One idea kept surfacing in my mind. I own 2 registered pistols, a .45 caliber revolver and a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol. But one day, while jogging, I noticed something shiny in the tall grass. It was a Taurus .380 semi-automatic pistol. I picked it up. It was loaded and fully functional, but the serial number had been filed off. I knew it was illegal, but I kept it. After cleaning it, I took it to a shooting range one day, and to my surprise, it shot very accurately. As I thought about Larry, I kept picturing that gun. How easy it would be. I couldn't deny that I'd thought about using the gun, but I had my daughters to think about. Ending up behind bars would only make things worse, for them and for me. I pushed those dark thoughts aside. I also realized it wasn't the right time to talk to Lee. Sooner or later, we'd have to have a face-to-face conversation. But just the thought of meeting her made me feel almost physically ill. Sitting alone in the house, a feeling of deep despair crept over me. It was like a heavy blanket had been thrown over me, pinning me to the sofa. My breathing became labored, and suddenly, a wave of fear gripped me. I jumped up, almost instinctively, as if to shake the feeling off. If someone had seen me, they might have thought I'd lost my mind. I knew I had to move, so I went for a brisk walk. Somehow, my feet led me past Larry's house. I didn't linger but made note of how little security it seemed to have. The house was large, new, and close to the street. There was a basketball hoop in the driveway, but no car in sight. There was also a large garage at the back. I walked past, made a loop, and walked past it again, discreetly taking a few photos with my phone. Next, I walked past Lee's parents' house further north. Their cars were parked in the driveway, and I noticed Lee's car was still in our garage. I kept walking, heading into a store where I bought a prepaid cell phone and a Diet Pepsi. Eventually, I returned home. It was 3 p.m. on a Saturday. Back at the house, I made myself a sandwich but couldn't finish it. Maybe 3 bites. The moment I stopped moving, that suffocating despair came rushing back. I took out the .380 pistol and drove out of town to my friend's property, where he had a couple of hectares of land with an open shooting range. His family was away in Florida, so I knew the place would be empty. I fired 2 boxes of cartridges from the pistol. The gun was inexpensive but functional, although heavier than an ideal firearm would be. On the way home, I stopped at a pharmacy and bought 2 neoprene thigh wraps. Back at home, I constructed a makeshift body holster for the .380, positioning it in my lumbar region. I even tested running with it. It worked fine. My cell phone had been off all day, and when I turned it back on, I found 11 voicemails, 20 or so text messages from family, colleagues, and friends, and countless emails. The voicemails were mostly from Lee, Ellen, and my mom, all saying the same thing. Please contact us. We need to talk. The text messages were similar, but 2 stood out. They were from Lee's father, Milt. The first was an apology for Lee's actions and for failing to raise a more responsible daughter. The second message, sent just a few minutes before, asked if I wanted to talk with him away from the women. I called him, but the call went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message, but 3 minutes later, he called me back. Marty, he said, I needed to get out of the house for a walk. What's happened? I saw you wanted to talk. Milt, I said, can we meet somewhere? How about Raymond Park, near the Hops Court? Okay, in about 30 minutes. That'll work, he said. I put on jeans and slipped the .380 into my pocket, just in case I saw Larry, who lived only half a mile from the park. After a 10-minute drive, I parked and walked past Larry's house again before heading to the park. Milt was already there when I arrived. It was a small park with only a handful of people around. We shook hands and sat on a bench near the basketball court. Milt started, I wanted to make sure you were okay. From what Ellen and your mom have said, I've been worried. I'm not okay, Milt, I said flatly. I feel worse than I've ever felt before in my life. He nodded solemnly. That's how I felt when my mother passed away. Took me a year to feel like myself again. I just kept going, day by day, working and trying to focus on other things. That's what you should do too. Easy to say, damn hard to do, I muttered. And it's only been 1 day. Milt sighed. If it's any consolation, Lee is nearly catatonic. She hasn't eaten since she came to our house, and I doubt she's spoken more than 3 sentences. We're thinking of calling for help. You're probably right, I replied bitterly. The guilt is eating her alive, but I don't have that guilt. What I do have is anger. I'm sorry to hear that, Milt said quietly. But for the girl's sake, she needs to get herself together. They'll need her. I don't get why she's so shocked, I said, shaking my head. She did everything openly. Did she really think no one would find out? That I wouldn't find out? Sooner or later, even without YouTube, someone, her colleagues, my friends, would have caught wind of it. I don't think she was thinking clearly at all, Milt said. She was in a strange situation, far from home, and starstruck by a celebrity. I think she gave in to feelings she would normally suppress. I let out a dry laugh. You're trying to rationalize this, but I'm telling you, Milt. She's had a thing for Larry since college. Milt was quiet for a moment, then said, Maybe, but even if she did, I don't think she meant for any of this to happen. Doesn't matter, I said firmly. She made her choice, and now we're all paying for it. And thought she could have her cake and eat it too, I said bitterly. Milt sighed. And what are you going to do? It's very, very likely that I'll divorce her, I replied firmly. Right now, I can't even think about her without feeling anger and hostility. I just hope I don't make myself sick because of all this. Milt nodded. Look, I know everyone else is telling you to wait before making any decisions. And honestly, I can't understand how you could go back to any semblance of family life with her after this. Yes, I said, almost cutting him off. This case is lost. I'll wait, but not for long. You should prepare her. If she's as bad off as you say, I'll try to handle things carefully. We parted ways, and I started walking back to my car, parked on a nearby street. Just as I reached the corner, I saw Larry dribbling a basketball toward the park's court. He was coming from the intersecting street that I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the gun in my pocket. At the same moment, Milt, driving down the street in his car, saw Larry as well and honked his horn. Larry jumped, startled, and lost control of the basketball. It rolled down the street. Without thinking, Larry ran after it, not even looking for oncoming traffic. And then it happened. It wasn't Milt who hit him. Another car, an SUV traveling in the opposite direction, struck Larry. The driver had been blocked by Milt's car and likely didn't see Larry until it was too late. The SUV hit him hard, sending him over the hood and windshield, flipping him into the air before he crashed onto the asphalt. Milt kept driving. I ran to Larry, and at that moment he was still alive, conscious even. I looked at him as he lay there. The driver of the SUV, an older man, ran up as well, shouting that he'd already called 911. The hospital was only 4 blocks away, but there wasn't enough time. Larry tried to say something to me, but no words came out. I watched as he slowly faded away. The paramedics arrived 2 minutes later. They worked on him as hard as they could, but it was no use. Big Al was gone. Oddly, I felt betrayed. The police arrived shortly after. I was nervous because, while I had a concealed carry permit, the gun in my pocket was illegal. Still, I answered all their questions, gave my name and address, and was released without any issues. The elderly SUV driver was shaken and upset. I reassured him, along with the police, that there was nothing he could have done. Larry had recklessly chased the ball into the street. About an hour later, I drove home. Once there, I took the .380 pistol and tossed it out for good. I then drove straight to Milt's house. I knew Lee was there, but I wasn't ready to talk to her. I needed to speak with Milt about what had just happened. When I arrived, I rang the doorbell. Ellen answered, and her face immediately registered my emotional state. I was charged with adrenaline and, strangely, a kind of euphoria. She asked gently, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I replied quickly. "Is Milt here? I need to discuss something with him." Ellen nodded but hesitated. "Don't you want to see Lee?" "No. Too soon." She called out, "Milt, Marty's here." Milt came downstairs, and I motioned for him to come outside with me. We walked a short distance from the house. "Milt," I said, "Big Al is dead." Milt's eyes widened. "Damn. Did you kill him?" He looked at me closely, almost cautiously. "I saw you had a gun, Marty." "God. No, I didn't kill him," I said firmly. "He got hit by a car. I saw it happen. He was chasing his basketball and ran into the street like a child. He's gone." Milt stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. "God works in mysterious ways," he muttered. This was an accident. A clear accident. "Yes," I agreed. "It was an accident." But I still felt betrayed when he died. And then I hesitated. Then I saw it as a kind of saving grace. Milt sighed. "I'll leave it to you or Ellen to tell Lee that her boyfriend is dead." "He's not her boyfriend," Milt said defensively. "But yes, we'll tell her. It's bound to be all over the news soon anyway." "Certainly," I replied. "How is she?" "Not good," he admitted. "You, on the other hand, seem almost relieved." "I guess I am," I said. "I feel like I dodged a bullet, literally. But I also know I can't be with her again. No matter what." Milt nodded slowly. "I want to save my daughter," he said, his voice heavy. "I think she's heading into the abyss. I know she's screwed up big time, but I love her. I want her to have a life. So I'm asking you, if you see a way, at least don't interfere. Maybe later on you can lend a hand." "That's a big ask, Milt," I said after a moment. "Let me think about it. But for now, you need to keep her away from me. If I see her too soon, I won't be able to help anyone." "Fair enough," Milt said. "Congratulations on escaping murder," he added with a wry smile. We laughed, an odd but genuine laugh, before heading back to the house. I left shortly after. That night I slept well. The girls called, and we had a good conversation. They seemed to be in better spirits, which lifted my mood. On Sunday, though, depression crept back in. It was a beautiful day, but I had nothing better to do than think about the state of my marriage. No matter what Milt said, I knew Lee and I could never be together again. That realization made me deeply sad, but it was the truth. I went for another long run, then walked along the river to the shopping center before returning home. After showering, I headed to my parents' house for a Sunday picnic with the girls. The twins were in better moods. They'd had a conference call with Lee, who seemed more upbeat. She encouraged them and they talked about school. Notably, there was no mention of Big Al, Lee's infidelity, or Larry's death. The call focused on lighter topics, like school and their day-to-day lives. Lee told them she'd see them as soon as she got better. Despite everything, I had a good time that afternoon. While the girls were swimming in the pool, I told my parents that I had witnessed Big Al's accident and death. They were shocked. Damn, why father asked. "You didn't have anything to do with it, did you?" "No," I replied firmly. "It was just a coincidence. I was in the park with Milt talking. He drove off and then Larry got hit. He ran into the street chasing his basketball." "Fine," my father said after a moment. "Well, I can't say I'm sorry. May the Lord have mercy on his soul." We changed the subject after that. On Monday, Joan Ellis called me. Her first question was about how I felt regarding Larry's death. She didn't know I had been there, as my name hadn't been published. I told her the whole story. She listened but sounded both amazed and maybe a little suspicious. If I were in her position, I'd probably feel the same. Afterward, she informed me that the divorce documents would be ready by Wednesday and asked when I wanted them to be served. I told her to wait a little while. Lee was in bad shape and I had made a sort of promise to Milt. The girls decided to go to school even though Big AL's death and his outburst the week before was big news. I was left alone for most of the day and decided to work. I put in a half day for the army, focusing for a couple of hours before moving on to my own projects. Later, I picked up the girls from school after their extracurricular activities. For dinner, we ate pizza, something I could make myself and that they loved. We had a good evening, but before bed, both girls asked the same question, "Will Mom be back?" I answered them honestly. I don't think things will go back to the way they were. I can't say for certain what the future holds, but I don't see us returning to the same agreements as before. Something else awaits us, but no matter what, we both love you very much. On Tuesday, both Milt and Ellen called. They wanted to meet, so we agreed to meet at Starbucks. Over coffee, Milt told me he had contacted a marriage counselor and asked me to get involved with Lee. Ellen added, "If you file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, the court will most likely order counseling anyway." "Okay," I said after thinking for a moment, "but I won't lie about how I feel. If we get into this and really dig deep, I don't see it helping us." "We're not asking you to lie," Milt said. "Just take things slowly. Listen to the psychologist talk to Lee. Otherwise, I think she's going to have even bigger problems. Big AL's accident seems to have shaken her to her core. By the way, we didn't tell her you were there when it happened." Ellen added, "The first session is scheduled for next Monday at 10 a.m. The following Monday, I arrived promptly at 10 o'clock for the counseling session. I didn't want to risk waiting in the same room as Lee. The counselor, Dr. Sylvia Price, greeted us. She was a slightly plump but pleasant woman in her 50s, a psychologist certified in marriage and family counseling. She led us into her office. Until that moment, Lee and I hadn't spoken. She looked unwell, pale and constantly rubbing her hands together. Dr. Price began by explaining the nature of her practice and her experience working with cases of adultery. Then she asked me directly, "Marty, what is your goal in counseling?" I answered without hesitation, "I want to move forward in life. I want to remain a good father to my children, but I don't believe reconciliation in this marriage is possible." She turned to Lee. "And your goals?" Lee's voice was trembling. "I want my old life back. I know that might not happen, but I'd like to remain Marty's wife, even if things don't have to be the same." Dr. Price looked at both of us and summarized. As I understand it, Lee went to Miami for a work conference, where she reconnected with a man she knew from university. They spent several nights together. This man was well known, and the two were publicly linked. "Is that correct?" Lee nodded. "Yes," she said quietly. "I didn't think my actions in Miami would become public knowledge. I thought it would only affect the time I was away from my family." Dr. Price pressed further. "If that's true, why did you go dancing with Mr. Johnson? You must have known he was a famous person." Lee hesitated. "I thought it would be fun. It wasn't near the hotel. And, well, it was fun." Dr. Price didn't let her off the hook. "But you knew your colleagues would find out about your relationship. And you must have understood that Marty would find out too, if not as quickly as he did, then eventually." Lee lowered her head. "Yes," she admitted quietly. Dr. Price turned to me. "Marty, could you explain why you're so certain the marriage is over?" I looked directly at Lee. Because Lee was the only person in this world I loved and trusted more than anyone else. When I saw that she could betray me so easily and so openly, I was devastated. My grandparents died in an accident years ago, and I felt terrible pain for a long time. But this doesn't even compare. Nothing compares. I would never, ever put myself in a position to be crushed like this again. If Lee could do this to me, then anyone could. I could never give her, or anyone, that kind of power over me again. Lee broke into open sobs as I finished speaking. Dr. Price asked, "Marty, how do you feel seeing her in this state?" I exhaled, shaking my head. "I'm just sad and angry. It was so blatantly cruel to me and to our children. Even if it was done out of stupidity without the intention to cause harm, it still destroyed everything. It was so bad," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "And for what? 3 nights with some stud you wanted in college." I looked directly at Lee when I asked this. Lee sobbed, No, I don't know why I did it." Dr. Price interjected, "Calm down, Lee. Is it true that you had sexual feelings for Mr. Johnson when you were in college?" Lee nodded slowly. "Yes, he was big, handsome, and famous. He pestered me back then, but I was with Marty and I said no." Dr. Price pressed further. "Then why did you say yes in Miami?" Lee hesitated before answering. For several months leading up to this, I felt a little out of touch. We've all been so busy. Work, family, everything felt like a routine. I was excited about going to Miami. I thought the trip might rejuvenate me. But as soon as I got there, I saw Larry. He hugged me tightly, and in that moment, I realized I wouldn't push him away if he wanted me. Everything happened so fast. I can't explain it. Lee paused, wiping her tears. "We had great sex the night before I left, didn't we? Or was I pretending?" She turned to me, her voice cracking. "No, it was all real," she said, tears streaming down her face. It made me tingle the entire flight. "Crap, I feel so bad." Lee broke into sobs again, and my own tears began to flow. But so did my boiling anger. I could feel it rising, threatening to consume me. I didn't trust myself to hold it back, so I abruptly stood and walked into the outer office. The rage burned inside me. I clenched my fists, ready to hit the furniture, when Dr. Price came out and interrupted my spiral. "Why don't you go down to the men's room for a minute?" she suggested. "I'll speak to Lee alone for a bit, and then I can talk with you privately." I nodded and left, heading to the restroom to cool off. When I returned 15 minutes later, Lee was walking out of the office. Her eyes were red and swollen, but she was no longer crying. "Sorry, Marty," she said softly before leaving. Dr. Price then motioned for me to sit. "Marty, how do you feel about Mr. Johnson's death?" she asked. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling heavily. "You know, I was there. I saw him die," I admitted, "and I was happy about it. I could have killed him myself, but he was taken out before I could even consider it. It's ugly, but it's true. And now," I paused, "now I feel even worse. This guy ruined my entire life because of some fling, and I felt cheated that I wasn't the one to destroy him." Dr. Price studied me for a moment. "Why does Lee's affair with Larry feel like the destruction of your entire life?" I looked her straight in the eyes. "Because I was a family man. That was everything to me. And what I said about betrayal, I'll never get over it. Never. I can't imagine meeting anyone I could trust after this. Lee broke that trust completely. And when I trusted her the most." Dr. Price paused. "But only a few days have passed. Let me ask you something difficult. Have you thought about how good the sex might have been between Lee and Larry?" I clenched my jaw. "Yes, I saw the video on YouTube. They absolutely lusted after each other. And how did that make you feel?" "Betrayed," I said. "It was the worst possible betrayal. No matter what happens now, Lee will always remember that affair. Her fantastic, sex-soaked fling. And if we had stayed married, I would always believe she was thinking about him when we were together. Always. I looked at Dr. Price, my voice hardening. I wanted to destroy that memory for her. And I still fully intend to. That's the least I can do. Dr. Price frowned. That's a tough position, Marty. This is a woman you deeply loved in the past. I did love her, I said quietly, my voice cracking. Deeply, which is why this hurts so much. She gutted me. That ended the session. Dr. Price asked me to think about what kind of living arrangements might work if Lee and I separated. Dr. Price asked me to write down the facts about what happened in Miami and why I gave in. She also wanted me to outline how reconciliation might be possible between Marty and me. Before Miami, I felt out of place. I wasn't enjoying the things I used to love. Work had become routine and family life felt the same. This had been going on for months. I had this vague, gnawing feeling of stagnation. I looked forward to going to Miami. A coworker, Bean, had been flirting with me ever since he transferred to our office. I had always treated him like a joke, brushing off his advances without hesitation. But his persistence didn't wane. Bean wasn't a bad-looking guy. He had a cheerful, easygoing personality. I wasn't offended by his interest, but I wasn't tempted either. However, when we realized we'd both be attending the Miami conference, he started hinting at the trip as an opportunity for us. He suggested it would be easier to let loose far from home. I let him know clearly that I wasn't interested, but I admit, I was flattered. Deep down, I thought about the scenario, but I knew I would never follow through, not with him. It felt too risky, and honestly, I wasn't that attracted to him. But everything changed when we arrived at the hotel. When we were checking in, Larry appeared, and he was still as attractive and charming as I remembered from college. He hugged me energetically, and I was completely taken aback. In that moment, I realized he could have me. I wouldn't be able to resist if he pursued me. And Larry knew it too. Almost immediately, he pulled me aside and asked, "Is Marty here?" When I said no, he smiled and said he had a hotel room until Friday. Then, without hesitation, he told me, "I want you, and I know you want me." And the worst part? He was right. I agreed to have dinner with him. I still don't fully understand why I became such an easy target. Marty and I had just had incredible sex the night before I left for Miami. I wasn't feeling neglected or unloved, but something in me felt weak, vulnerable, and when Larry pursued me, I didn't fight it. The night before I left for Miami, I was still on edge. So was Larry. Being away from home felt like uncharted territory, a free pass I hadn't given myself permission to think about before. I didn't once consider Marty or the consequences of him finding out I cheated, not consciously, at least. If I did think about it, I can't remember now. But I should have. If I had met Larry in Virginia, I know I could have turned him down. But in Miami, I told myself I was in another world for a few days, and I convinced myself it would stay that way. At dinner, Larry and I didn't need to say much. There was an unspoken understanding between us that we'd go back to his room afterward, skipping dessert. Once inside, the air between us crackled with anticipation. Larry pulled me into a passionate kiss, and soon we were lost in each other's embrace. Without hesitation, our clothes fell away, consumed by the heat of the moment. My focus narrowed solely to him, his sculpted physique, his undeniable allure. Swept up in mutual excitement, we surrendered to our desires. He carried me to the bed, and our passion ignited intensely. Over the course of the night, I reached multiple peaks of pleasure, until I finally surrendered to blissful unconsciousness. I awoke to his tender kisses, and the cycle repeated. Our intimacy continued into the morning, leaving me feeling completely fulfilled. Yet I rushed to breakfast, tardy for the team meeting. As I arrived, I noticed the knowing glances from my colleagues. I could sense their speculation swirling around me, but I brushed off any concerns about them contacting Marty. Their conjectures, I assured myself, were baseless. My time with Larry surpassed anything I'd experienced before. Perhaps it was the liberation of being far from home, free of responsibilities, or the intoxicating pull of his desire for me. Despite the fact that he could have had anyone, he chose me, and that magnetic connection was irresistible. After our first encounter, the pattern repeated. Following a work meeting, I reached out to Larry. Without hesitation, we indulged in a 2-hour rendezvous. We ordered room service, ate together, and returned to our passions. By the next morning, I could feel the sidelong glances becoming sharper, and I started to worry. But at 5 o'clock in the evening, I met Larry in his room again, and we stayed in bed until 8 o'clock. The sex was still amazing, but it no longer carried the mind-blowing intensity of the first night. Even so, we ordered food to the room, and then Larry suggested we go dancing. "Dress a little more decently," he said, which I took as a gentle nudge to tone down the hotel room vibe. That night, we went dancing. That's how I ended up on YouTube. I've since watched that video, fully aware that Marty had already seen it. I knew the moment he watched it, he'd see his loving wife openly, publicly lusting after another man. Watching it from his perspective made me feel sick with shame. After the dancing ended, Larry and I returned to the hotel, and our intimacy resumed. The following morning, with my flight looming, I woke up to engage in another intimate encounter with him. We shared a refreshing shower before getting dressed. Over breakfast in his room, we savored our final moments together before I returned to my own room to pack for departure. Later that morning, my roommate Cindy casually mentioned seeing me dancing on YouTube. She described it as provocative. A wave of terror washed over me, nearly paralyzing in its intensity. Suddenly, I realized how much was at stake. Not just my marriage, but my reputation. Unexpectedly, I ran into Bart Kovat, one of Marty's close friends, as we boarded the bus to the airport. I tried to act normal and asked him if Marty had called while I was away in Miami. I hadn't checked my phone once, but Bart told me the truth. Marty had called every evening, and every call had gone to voicemail. Bart then told me that Marty had seen the YouTube video. He also knew I had spent every night with Larry. I was speechless. The flight home was agonizing. Nobody wanted to talk to me. I sat by the window while an unfamiliar man sat beside me. I knew Larry was on the same flight, but I didn't see him. When we landed, I got my luggage and finally saw Larry. He approached me and asked if I'd be okay. I told him, "It will probably never be good again." He looked as dejected as I felt. I stood in line for a taxi, still not thinking about the fact that Marty might be waiting to pick me up. When my taxi arrived, the dispatcher put Larry in the same cab. We sat in silence. He apologized, saying he hadn't considered the consequences of being on YouTube. "I didn't think of it," he admitted. I told him I didn't want to talk and asked the taxi driver to drop him off first. When I got home, I couldn't get into the house. Marty had changed the code. When he opened the door, his expression was a mix of devastation and anger. Unable to face him, I turned and ran away. Since then, I've been staying with my parents, living in an almost complete stupor. I tried to talk to the girls, but Betsy pushed me away. And how could I blame her? Talking on the phone went better, though. Took me an hour to prepare myself emotionally before I called them. After that first counseling session, I left feeling like my marriage was truly over. Marty's explanation of his feelings, that I was the one person he trusted most, and I broke that trust in the worst possible way, was like a dagger to my heart. Now, I don't know how to deal with his anger and grief, and I don't know how I could ever ask him to trust me again. I don't deserve him, and I also don't know. When my mother told me that Larry was dead, hit by a car, I felt an overwhelming wave of sorrow. While we were in the taxi that day, Larry had asked me to call him later. I could have called, but now he's gone, and because of that I feel another emptiness inside me. If I ever had sex with another man again, I was sure I would always remember the time I spent with Larry. But now, maybe not. I can't shake the feeling that if I had refused him, he might still be alive. It doesn't make sense, but somehow, it does. I'm completely screwed. Things are getting better at home. School has been tough for the twins, but not impossible. Betsy is still angry, and Linda misses her mother, though I think Betsy misses her too, even if she won't admit it. They have nightly teleconferences with Lee, and while she looks a little better during the calls, it's hard to tell from such brief interactions. Our second consultation with Dr. Price was similar to the first, except that we each had individual sessions before the joint session. Dr. Price asked me, "Have you thought about what might make reconciliation possible?" "Yes," I replied, "but I couldn't think of anything. Sorry." "Do you think that if you understood why Lee got involved with Larry, you could work on trusting her? If you knew what caused it, could you figure out how to prevent it in the future?" "This is stupidity, pardon the expression," I said firmly. "I think she just wanted sex with a guy and thought she could do it without consequences." "Isn't that what she said?" "But you don't believe her?" Dr. Price pressed. "I believe her about lusting after Larry, but I don't believe she wanted to get caught." "Why not?" "Good question. Maybe ask her, document. But I'll tell you this, it doesn't matter. This won't end with reconciliation. It's impossible to overcome a senseless betrayal. Betrayal born from the belief that you can get away with it is unforgivable." Dr. Price hesitated. "What if she wanted to be caught?" I froze. "That," I said slowly, "would be even worse. If she wanted to be caught, that means she simply wanted to leave. Leave the family. Leave me, leave the life we built. Maybe she wanted drama. You know," I added bitterly. "If Larry were still alive, I think she'd be with him right now." Our joint session began and ended the same way, with Lee asking for forgiveness. I didn't buy it. Even if she was truly sorry, even if she could explain everything in a way that made sense, I couldn't be with her. Staying with her would feel like living next to a ticking time bomb. After that session, I asked my lawyer to serve the divorce papers. Today, I was served with divorce papers. I've been writing in this journal because I hope it might lead to some insight, if not now, then someday in the future. In our consultation this week, I noticed Marty seemed calmer. He wasn't as angry as before. To me, that was the clearest sign that we were done. I've read about this, the stages of grief. One of the last stages is acceptance. Marty has accepted that we're divorcing and that my affair marked the end of our marriage. The papers didn't surprise me. I've returned to work, but the reception from my colleagues has been icy. Everyone knows I'm the woman who ruined her family life. Even Brady Bean, who had pursued me relentlessly, has distanced himself. It's his loss, I suppose. He could have had a chance, but I wouldn't have given in. My lawyer advised me to ask for joint custody of the girls. Since Marty already owned the house before our marriage, the lawyer said he would likely stay in it with the twins. The best I could hope for was week-by-week custody, or maybe alternating days off if I moved to a place in their school district. It's all so depressing. I told the lawyer to confess to my infidelity in Miami and to expedite the divorce process. I don't need money from Marty, and it's obvious he doesn't want money from me either. Our savings will be split 50-50 without any drama. So many years of my life feel wasted, and now all I have left are memories. But I did better than Larry. I don't even feel sorry for him anymore. I know I'm to blame, but he has his share of the blame too. He didn't have to pursue me. He could have had anyone. Why me? I'll never understand. Dr. Price suggested that my dancing, my open sexual behavior, and my inability to hide my infidelity might mean that I subconsciously wanted to start a new, more exciting life. But I don't believe that's true. Marty, on the other hand, thinks I wanted to be caught, to be freed from our life. Well, now I'm free and I hate it. I have no appetite for sex. I don't go to bars. I've turned down Brady Bean multiple times, and I don't even feel tempted. It would be so easy to fall into something casual, but I don't want to. How long will this emptiness last? Today, the divorce was finalized. I was granted primary custody of the twins. They'll live in the house with me, just as they always have. Lee will have visitation rights every other weekend, 2 weeks in the summer, and either Thanksgiving or Christmas. The girls will probably end up with 2 sets of gifts for every holiday. Betsy and Linda seemed relieved when I told them. They didn't ask many questions, just nodded quietly as I sat in the now quiet house. I thought about everything that's happened. I know this is the right decision, but the weight of it still presses on me. For the girl's sake, I hope Lee can rebuild herself. I hope she can find some semblance of happiness. The final settlement ended up being the same arrangement we'd been following for the past 6 months. Lee had gotten an apartment about 2 miles away, and we agreed on a shared custody schedule for the twins. I told Milt and Ellen they were welcome to come over anytime, and they often do. I'm sure they also visit the girls when they're with Lee on the weekends. I haven't gone on many dates since the divorce. There are a few divorced women in our old circle of friends, and I've gone out with 3 of them. We've gone to dinner, bowling, and spent some casual evenings together. In one case, I moved back into the house for a week without the kids, and we were intimate during that time. The sex was usually very good for all 3 of them, I think, but I made it clear to each one that my recent experiences had scarred me deeply. I let them know there wouldn't be any permanence or exclusivity in our relationships. They all know what happened. Everyone in our social circle knows, so they understand why I feel this way. 2 of them still seem to think that someday I'll overcome my fearfulness, but I don't think I ever will. This is a long journey, and I don't believe it has an endpoint. The pain I went through, the pure agony of imagining Lee with that idiot Larry, will never leave me. To this day, the memory is just as strong, although I try not to think about it. The twins have adapted reasonably well. Linda is good to Lee, but Betsy is not. Betsy holds grudges for a long time. She's a lot like me in that way. Maybe that's a bad thing. I've discussed Betsy's attitude with Ellen, but not with Lee. Lee and I don't talk much. She knows I don't want to talk to her. The less I see of her, the better. It's just too painful. Seeing her brings up everything I want to avoid. Ellen says she worries about Lee, who has become withdrawn and somewhat aimless. I don't often see her around the neighborhood, even though we live close and communicate in the same group when necessary. I don't sympathize with her and likely never will. I've never understood why she did what she did, and I believe she doesn't fully understand it either. The best I can do is chalk it up to a strange combination of unlikely events. Her vague discontent, the opportunity to go to Miami, and, most critically, meeting Larry. Any 2 of those factors likely wouldn't have been enough to spark the affair. But all 3 came together and, poof, the marriage was ruined. 1 year after the divorce, Milt played golf on a Saturday afternoon, as he often did. He was part of a regular foursome, but on this particular day, one of the members was replaced by an old school friend, Fred Cunningham. Fred was an electrical engineer, and the 2 men had known each other since school. As they walked from the 9th hole, they began to have a personal conversation, a topic they hadn't discussed before. Milt finally asked, "How are you coping these days, Fred?" Fred responded, "I'm fine, because I agreed to try it myself." Milt glanced at him, confused. "Try what?" Fred sighed. "I followed him, Milt, from his house just like you said. Everything played out exactly as you described. Larry always went to play on Saturday afternoons if he was in town. Even after retiring, he stuck to that schedule." Milt looked away, hesitant. "I read about it in the papers. I couldn't believe it when he rushed into the street like that. Such a big decision on your part, and you accepted it so quickly." Fred nodded solemnly. "I just did it. If Larry hadn't done what he did, I don't know if I could have gone through with it. But your horn startled him. And then he trailed off. I was sure you were as shocked as I was." Milt let out a breath. "It worked, not just perfectly, but more than perfectly. Almost as if God intervened to protect Marty." Fred smiled faintly. "I was certainly shocked to see him die. I called 911, of course. Marty, he was there, wasn't he? I thought, if this works, Marty should see it for himself. Maybe it would give him some kind of closure." Milt shook his head. "Marty later said he felt cheated by it. He wanted to kill Larry himself. I know he would have done it sooner or later. He even had a gun with him that day. But I thought about my granddaughters. They deserved a normal father and a stable family. If Marty had been arrested for murder, well, Lee might have done something rash, and that would have been her fault." Fred hesitated. "But did Larry deserve to die?" Milt sighed deeply. "Hard to say, but Marty and the girls certainly deserve to live. Lee too, in her way." The two old friends fell silent, walking side by side down the golf course aisle. They never spoke about the topic again.